My parents left me in a homeless shelter 300 miles away and laughed, "Let's see how she survives." Mom laughed, "She's dead weight, dump her, homeless suits her perfectly." Dad added, "Some children just don't deserve family support." Sister agreed, finally getting rid of the family burden. Brother nodded, "Some people just need to learn real independence." I stood there with no money, no phone, no way home. Years later I made them beg. I'm Kendra, and I need to tell you about the day my family literally threw me away like garbage. I was 18, in my final months of senior year, when my entire world collapsed in the most brutal way imaginable. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. My parents, Michael and Linda Thompson, had been acting strange for weeks. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, knowing glances between my older sister Emma and my younger brother Jake. I thought maybe they were planning a surprise for my 18th birthday coming up in December. How naive I was. "Kendra, pack a bag. We're taking a family trip," my mother announced that morning, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. My father stood behind her, arms crossed, wearing the same cold expression. Emma smirked from the kitchen counter while Jake avoided eye contact entirely. I should have known something was wrong. We never took family trips. Ever. But I was desperate for any sign that my family actually cared about me, so I packed quickly, throwing clothes into an old duffel bag. I was excited, stupidly hopeful that maybe this was their way of showing love. The car ride was eerily silent. 4 hours of highway stretching endlessly while my parents exchanged meaningful looks in the front seat. Emma sat beside me, scrolling through her phone with an unsatisfied smile that made my stomach churn. Jake stared out the window, his usual animated chatter completely absent. "Where are we going exactly?" I finally asked as we passed a sign for Riverside, a city I'd never heard of, 300 miles from our home in Millfield. "You'll see," my father Michael replied curtly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When we pulled up to the Riverside Emergency Shelter, my blood ran cold. The building was weathered brick with barred windows, and a line of people with hollow eyes waited outside. My heart started pounding. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" I turned to face them, panic rising in my throat. My mother Linda turned around slowly, and the look in her eyes was pure ice. "Kendra, we've decided that you need to learn some independence. Real independence." "What do you mean?" My voice cracked. "She's dead weight," my mother continued, actually laughing. "Dump her. Homeless suits her perfectly." The words hit me like physical blows. My father nodded approvingly. "Some children just don't deserve family support, Kendra. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born." Emma leaned forward, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Finally getting rid of the family burden. Do you know how embarrassing it's been having you as a sister? You're weird, you don't fit in, and honestly, we're all better off without you." Jake, my little brother who I'd helped with homework countless times, who I defended from bullies, looked at me with empty eyes. "Some people just need to learn real independence, Kendra. Maybe this will make you finally grow up." I sat there frozen, unable to process what was happening. This had to be a nightmare. Families didn't do this. Parents didn't abandon their children at homeless shelters like unwanted pets. "Get out," my father ordered. "Take your bag and get out." "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" "I'll change, I'll be better, I promise. You existing is what you did wrong," my mother snapped. "We've given you 17 years of our lives, and you've given us nothing but disappointment in return." Emma reached across me and opened the car door. "Go. Stop being pathetic." I stumbled out onto the sidewalk, clutching my duffel bag, and watched my family drive away without looking back. Not one of them even glanced in the rearview mirror. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for them to come back, to tell me it was all a horrible joke. They never came back. I had no money. No phone. No identification except my driver's license. I was 300 miles from home with nothing but the clothes in my bag and a crushing realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just discarded me like trash. The shelter intake process was humiliating. Mrs. Rodriguez, the intake coordinator, was kind but overwhelmed. She explained that they'd try to contact my parents, though at 18 I was technically an adult. "Please don't," I begged. "They're the ones who brought me here. They left me." Her face went pale. In 20 years of social work, she'd never encountered parents who voluntarily abandoned their adult child at a shelter. She made the calls anyway. My father Michael answered on the third ring. "Thompson residence." "Mr. Thompson, this is Maria Rodriguez from Riverside Emergency Shelter. Your daughter Kendra is here, and she claims you abandoned her. I need you to come pick her up immediately." I could hear his laughter through the phone. "Kendra is no longer our responsibility. We've decided she needs to learn to survive on her own. Don't call this number again. He hung up. Mrs. Rodriguez stared at the phone in shock. She tried calling back multiple times. My mother answered once, screamed that I was dead to them, and then they disconnected their phone entirely. The next few months were hell. The shelter was overcrowded, dangerous, and filled with people who'd given up on life. I was the youngest person there by decades. I slept on a thin mattress in a room with 12 other women, some mentally ill, others addicted to substances that made them unpredictable and violent. But something inside me refused to break. Maybe it was pure spite, or maybe it was survival instinct, but I made a decision that first night, I would not just survive. I would thrive. And someday, somehow, I would make them regret every cruel word they'd said to me. Mrs. Rodriguez became my lifeline. She helped me finish my senior year at Riverside High through their adult education program and get a part-time job at a local diner called Mel's. The owner, Patricia Chen, was a tough woman in her 50s who took one look at my situation and decided to become my unofficial guardian angel. "Kid, I've seen a lot of hard luck stories," Patricia told me on my first day. "But I've never seen parents dump their own child. You work hard, show up on time, and don't steal from me, and I'll make sure you have enough hours to survive." I worked every hour I wasn't in school. Breakfast shift, lunch shift, dinner shift on weekends. My hands were constantly burned from grease, my feet ached from standing, and I smelled like hash browns and coffee every moment of my life. But Patricia paid me fair wages and let me take home leftover food, which often meant the difference between eating and going hungry. School was its own challenge. I had no permanent address, no parent to sign forms, no way to participate in normal teenage activities. But I threw myself into my studies with desperate energy. I graduated on time with a 4.0 GPA. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me apply for every scholarship available, including programs specifically for aging out foster youth and homeless students. We spent countless evenings in the shelter's common room, filling out applications, writing essays about overcoming adversity. I wrote about being abandoned, about learning strength I never knew I had, about discovering that family isn't always blood. The day I got my acceptance letter to State University with a full academic scholarship, I cried for hours. Not just from relief, but from a growing determination. I was going to build something so impressive, so successful, that my family would have no choice but to see what they'd thrown away. College was freedom I'd never experienced. I had my own dorm room, meal plans, access to resources I'd never dreamed of. I studied business and computer science, working summers at tech internships in the city. I barely slept, barely socialized, pouring every ounce of energy into building the foundation for the life I was determined to create. During my junior year, I started a small business helping local companies optimize their online presence. It started as freelance work to pay for textbooks, but by graduation, I had 12 employees and contracts with major regional businesses. I never forgot where I came from. Every success felt like revenge against the family who'd counted me out. Every milestone was proof that they'd been wrong about me. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. The summer before my senior year of college, I interned at a major tech company in Silicon Valley. Living in a cramped apartment with 3 other interns, I worked 16-hour days and learned everything I could about the industry that would become my weapon of choice. My supervisor, David Kim, was a brilliant engineer who saw potential in me that I was still discovering myself. "Kendra, you have something most people don't," he told me during one of our late-night coding sessions. "You have hunger. Not the normal kind of ambition that most college kids have, but real hunger. Like you're trying to prove something to the world." He had no idea how right he was. Every line of code I wrote, every problem I solved, every innovation I contributed was fuel for the fire that had been burning since that day at the shelter. I wasn't just learning to build software, I was learning to build power. That internship led to a job offer, but I turned it down. I had bigger plans. During my final semester, I spent every free moment developing my own application, a platform that would help small businesses manage their social media presence more effectively. I saw a gap in the market, a need that the big companies were ignoring because it wasn't profitable enough for them. Working out of my dorm room, surviving on energy drinks and pure determination, I built the foundation of what would become my first real success. My roommate Jessica thought I was losing my mind, staying up until 3 in the morning coding while she was out partying with friends. "Kendra, you're going to burn out," she warned me repeatedly. "College is supposed to be fun too, you know." But I didn't want fun. I wanted victory. Every night I worked was a night closer to proving that the family who'd thrown me away had made the biggest mistake of their lives. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and threw myself into the tech startup world. I lived on ramen and determination, coding 18-hour days in a shared workspace, networking at every event I could find. The shared workspace was called Tech Hub, a converted warehouse filled with dozens of other dreamers and hustlers, all trying to build the next big thing. I rented a desk in the corner for $300 a month, money I barely had after paying for my tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. The workspace hummed with energy 24 hours a day, programmers debugging code at 2 in the morning, marketing teams practicing pitches in glass-walled conference rooms, the constant sound of keyboards clicking and coffee makers brewing. Most of the other entrepreneurs came from money. They had family connections, trust funds, safety nets that allowed them to take risks without real consequences. They'd casually mention their parents' investment portfolios or family friends who were venture capitalists, treating their startup dreams like expensive hobbies. I had none of that. Failure wasn't an option because I had nowhere to fall back to. That desperation gave me an edge that my well-connected peers couldn't match. While they were networking at expensive happy hours, I was refining my code. While they were taking weekend trips home to see family, I was working on business development. My platform, which I called Connect Small, was designed specifically for businesses that couldn't afford to hire full-time social media managers. Restaurants, local shops, service providers, the backbone of every community, ignored by the major platforms because they didn't spend enough money to matter. Getting my first client was a nightmare. I cold called hundreds of businesses, sent thousands of emails, and got rejected more times than I could count. Most small business owners didn't even understand what social media management meant, let alone why they needed to pay someone to help them with it. But I was persistent in a way that only comes from having nothing to lose. I offered free trials, created custom demonstrations, and gradually built a client base of 20 local businesses. My first paying customer was Maria Santos, who owned a small Mexican restaurant called Abuela's Kitchen. "I don't really understand all this computer stuff," Maria admitted when I pitched her my services. "But you seem hungry, and hungry people work harder than comfortable people." She paid me $200 a month to manage her restaurant's social media presence. Within 3 months, her lunch crowd had doubled, and she was booking private events weeks in advance. Word spread through the small business community, and suddenly I had a waiting list of potential clients. By the end of my first year in Chicago, Connect Small was serving over 200 small businesses across the Midwest. I'd hired 4 employees, all working remotely, and was generating enough revenue to move to a better apartment and eat something other than ramen every night. But success bred bigger ambitions. I started seeing patterns in the data from my clients, understanding not just what worked for individual businesses, but what worked across entire industries. I began developing more sophisticated tools, analytics platforms that could predict trends and optimize posting schedules with machine learning algorithms. The bigger tech companies started noticing. I got calls from recruiters at Facebook, Google, and Twitter, offering me senior positions with 6-figure salaries and stock options. The offers were tempting, especially since I was still living paycheck to paycheck despite my business growth. But I didn't want to work for someone else's empire. I wanted to build my own. That's when I met Thomas Chen, a venture capitalist who specialized in early-stage tech companies. He found me through a mutual connection at TechHub, someone who'd been watching my rapid growth with interest. "Kendra, I've been following Connect Small for months," Thomas told me over coffee at an upscale cafe I couldn't normally afford. "Your growth metrics are impressive, but what's really interesting is your customer retention rate. 93% of your clients renew their contracts. That's unheard of in this industry." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I think you're sitting on something much bigger than a social media management platform. I think you're building the foundation for a comprehensive small business technology ecosystem." Thomas offered me $1.2 million for a 30% stake in my company. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, but giving up control felt wrong. I'd spent too many years having other people make decisions about my life. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I'm not ready to give up that much equity." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. How about $600,000 for 20%, with the understanding that when you're ready to scale nationally, you'll come to me first?" I accepted his offer, and suddenly I had the capital to transform Connect Small from a scrappy local operation into a legitimate technology company. I hired a proper development team, invested in better infrastructure, and began expanding to other major cities. The expansion was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each new market had its own characteristics, its own competition, its own regulatory requirements. What worked for small businesses in Chicago didn't necessarily work for similar businesses in Denver or Atlanta. By my 24th birthday, Connect Small was operating in 8 major cities with over 800 active clients. We'd grown to 18 employees, moved into a proper office space, and were generating annual revenue of $2.8 million. That's when the acquisition offers started coming in seriously. Tech Giant Corporation, one of the major players in business software, offered to buy Connect Small for $2.3 million. It wasn't just about the money, though that amount was life-changing, it was about validation. A major corporation valued something I'd built in my dorm room highly enough to pay millions for it. My first company, a social media management platform, sold for $2.3 million when I was 24. The money felt surreal. I'd gone from having literally nothing to more wealth than I knew how to handle. But instead of celebrating, I immediately started my next venture. After the Connect Small sale, I had enough capital to take bigger risks. I started investing in other entrepreneurs' companies, particularly those founded by people who reminded me of my younger self, hungry, driven individuals who'd been counted out by everyone else. My second major venture was a data analytics platform called Insight Edge. I'd noticed during my Connect Small days that small businesses were drowning in data they couldn't interpret. They had sales figures, website traffic, social media metrics, customer feedback, but no way to synthesize it all into actionable insights. Insight Edge was designed to solve that problem. Using machine learning algorithms I developed with a team of brilliant engineers poached from major tech companies, we created a platform that could analyze a business's complete data ecosystem and provide specific, actionable recommendations. Building Insight Edge was different from Connect Small. I had money now, which meant I could hire the best talent from the beginning instead of scrapping together a team of whoever I could afford. I rented a full floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise, created a working environment that attracted top-tier developers, and offered equity packages that convinced seasoned professionals to leave their stable corporate jobs. My head of development was Dr. Angela Martinez, a former MIT professor who'd left academia to build something that could have real-world impact. She was brilliant, demanding, and shared my perfectionist tendencies. "Kendra, you have an unusual leadership style," she told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "Most CEOs your age either micromanage everything or delegate too much and lose control. You seem to know exactly when to dive deep into details and when to trust your team." What she didn't understand was that I'd learned those skills through necessity, not natural talent. When you've survived being abandoned with nothing, you develop an acute sense of when you can rely on others, and when you need to handle things yourself. Insight Edge grew steadily over 3 years. Within that time, we were serving over 1,200 businesses across North America. The platform was generating insights that were genuinely transforming how small and medium-sized businesses operated. One of our clients, a chain of independent bookstores called Chapter and Verse, saw their revenue increase by 23% in 8 months simply by implementing our inventory optimization recommendations. Another client, a regional restaurant group, used our customer behavior analysis to redesign their menu and increase average order values by 18%. The success stories kept piling up, and so did the acquisition offers. This time, when Global Tech Solutions offered me $12 million for Insight Edge, I was ready to sell. I'd proven I could build valuable companies, and I wanted the capital to make even bigger moves. That sale, combined with my Connect Small money and smart investments in other startups, put my net worth over $15 million by the time I turned 28. I was wealthy in a way that still sometimes felt unreal, especially when I remembered eating day-old pastries from the diner where I'd worked as a teenager. But wealth wasn't the end goal, it was just a tool. I started my third company, Mitchell Consulting, with a much broader vision. Instead of building software, I wanted to build an empire. Mitchell Consulting would be a technology holding company, investing in promising startups while also providing high-level strategic consulting to established businesses. The consulting side of the business was where I really discovered my gift. I could walk into a struggling company, spend a few days analyzing their operations, and identify exactly what was holding them back. Sometimes it was inefficient processes, sometimes it was poor leadership, sometimes it was simply that they were solving the wrong problems. My reputation spread quickly through Chicago's business community, then nationally. I was the young CEO who could turn around companies that everyone else had written off. The consulting fees I charged were enormous, $50,000 for a week-long assessment, plus equity stakes in any companies I helped restructure. One of my most successful consulting projects was with Meridian Manufacturing, a family-owned company that made industrial equipment. They'd been losing money for 3 years straight and were considering bankruptcy when the founder's daughter, Rebecca Meridian, hired me as a last resort. "Everyone tells us we need to modernize, but we don't even know what that means," Rebecca admitted during our first meeting. "My father built this company with his hands, and now his son-in-law is trying to run it with spreadsheets and business school theories that don't seem to work." I spent 2 weeks at Meridian, working alongside their engineers and factory workers, understanding not just their financial problems but their cultural issues. The company was caught between 2 generations, the founder's hands-on approach and his son-in-law's MBA-driven strategies, and the conflict was paralyzing decision-making. My recommendations were specific and actionable: restructure the leadership hierarchy, implement lean manufacturing principles, and invest in automation for repetitive processes while preserving the skilled craftsmanship that differentiated their products. Within a year, Meridian was profitable again, and within 2 years, they doubled their revenue. That success led to more consulting contracts, bigger clients, and eventually, acquisition opportunities. I started buying struggling companies outright, implementing my turnaround strategies, and then either operating them as profitable subsidiaries or selling them for substantial profits. By the time I turned 30, Mitchell Consulting had grown into a diversified technology and business services company with offices in Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and Austin. We owned 12 subsidiary companies, had consulting contracts with over 200 businesses, and maintained investment stakes in 47 startups. And the next. Each success built on the previous one, each victory adding fuel to the fire that had been burning inside me since that terrible day at the shelter. By the time I turned 30, I owned a tech consulting firm with offices in 4 cities, had invested in dozens of successful startups, and had a personal net worth that I still sometimes couldn't believe was real. I'd been featured on magazine covers, given keynote speeches, and built a reputation as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the Midwest. But through all of it, I never forgot my family. 2 years earlier, I'd hired a private investigator to keep tabs on them, not because I missed them, but because I was waiting for the right moment. I wanted to understand their lives, their struggles, their vulnerabilities. I wanted to know exactly how to hurt them when the time came. The report made for interesting reading. My father Michael had been laid off from his job at the insurance company and was struggling to find new employment at 55. My mother Linda worked part-time at a retail store, barely making ends meet. Emma had married young, divorced badly, and was raising 2 kids as a single mother while working at a call center. Jake had dropped out of college, moved back home, and was working construction when he could find jobs. They'd lost their house to foreclosure 2 years earlier and were renting a small apartment in the worst part of Millfield. The same people who told me I didn't deserve family support were now struggling to support themselves. I waited. I bided my time, building my empire, growing my influence. I wanted to be so successful, so undeniably powerful, that when I finally made my move, they would understand exactly what they'd given up. Around this time, I'd also quietly purchased the Riverside Conference Center, the building where I would eventually orchestrate my revenge. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, controlling the very city where they'd abandoned me. The opportunity came when I was 32. My investigator informed me that my family was facing eviction. They owed 3 months of rent and had nowhere to go. Michael had been out of work for 8 months, Linda's retail job barely covered groceries, Emma couldn't afford childcare and was about to lose her job, and Jake had been injured on a construction site and couldn't work. It was perfect. I flew back to Millfield for the first time in 15 years. The city looked smaller, shabbier than I remembered. I drove past our old house, now owned by a young family with children playing in the yard we'd once called home. Then I drove to the rundown apartment complex where my family now lived. I sat in my Tesla outside their building for an hour, watching. Michael came out first, looking 20 years older than his actual age, shoulders slumped in defeat. He got into a rusted Honda that looked like it might not start and drove away. Probably to another job interview that wouldn't pan out. Linda emerged an hour later in a cheap uniform, walking to the bus stop. She looked tired in a way that went bone deep, the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of struggle and disappointment. This was the woman who'd laughed while abandoning me, who'd called me dead weight. Emma came out with her 2 kids, a boy about 8 and a girl maybe 6. She looked harassed and overwhelmed, snapping at the children who were clearly hungry and cranky. The girl was crying about something, and Emma's response was to yell at her to shut up. Watching her be cruel to her own children while remembering how she'd smiled when they abandoned me filled me with cold satisfaction. Jake was the last one I saw, limping out with his arm in a sling. He looked defeated, nothing like the confident kid who'd agreed that I needed to learn independence. Now he was learning about dependency himself. That night, I made my calls. First, to their landlord. Mr. Peterson, this is Kendra Mitchell from Mitchell Consulting. I understand the Thompson family is facing eviction. I'd like to pay their back rent and next 6 months in advance. Yes, I'll transfer the funds today. Then to Michael's former employer. I'd recently acquired a significant stake in their company. I understand you have some openings that might be suitable for experienced insurance professionals. I have a candidate I'd like you to consider. To the grocery store where Linda worked. Another company in my investment portfolio. I hear you have an employee named Linda Thompson. I'd like you to offer her the assistant manager position that just opened up. Yes, I know she doesn't have management experience, but I have a feeling she'll work out. To Emma's childcare center. I made an anonymous donation large enough to provide free care for her children for the next year. To Jake's medical bills. I had them all transferred to a charitable foundation I'd established, then marked as paid in full. Within a week, every single one of their financial problems had been mysteriously solved. Jobs appeared out of nowhere. Bills disappeared. Their rent was suddenly paid months in advance. But they didn't know why. They had no idea that their salvation had come from the daughter they'd thrown away. I waited another month, letting them settle into their newfound stability, before I made my next move. I had my assistant call each of them individually with the same message: they'd been selected to receive a Community Service Award from the Millfield Chamber of Commerce, recognizing their perseverance through difficult times. The ceremony would be held at the Riverside Conference Center, and attendance was mandatory to receive their award. The Riverside Conference Center was a building I'd purchased the year before, though they didn't know that either. I had it completely renovated, turning it into a gleaming venue for corporate events and community gatherings. The irony of the location wasn't lost on me. Riverside was the city where they'd abandoned me all those years ago. On the day of the ceremony, I arrived early to watch them come in. Michael wore his best suit, which was clearly old and didn't quite fit anymore. Linda had bought a new dress for the occasion, probably the first new clothing she'd purchased in years. Emma brought her children, both dressed up and excited about the fancy venue. Jake had his arm in a nice sling and walked with less of a limp than I'd seen before. They looked happy. Hopeful. Like people who thought their luck was finally changing. I waited until everyone was seated before I made my entrance. I wore a black designer suit that cost more than they probably made in 6 months, my hair and makeup professionally done, every inch of me screaming success and power. The moment they saw me, the color drained from their faces. Michael's mouth fell open. Linda actually gasped out loud. Emma grabbed her children protectively, as if I might hurt them. Jake just stared, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and growing horror. I walked to the podium slowly, savoring every second of their shock and growing realization. The few other attendees, people I'd hired to fill out the audience, applauded politely, having no idea they were witnessing the culmination of 15 years of planning. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Thank you all for coming to tonight's very special event. I'm Kendra Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Consulting, and I have a story to tell you about family, perseverance, and the true meaning of independence." Linda tried to stand up, but Michael grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. They were trapped, surrounded by strangers, unable to leave without causing a scene. 15 years ago, I continued, I stood outside a homeless shelter in this very city. I was 17 years old, with no money, no phone, and no way to get home. I'd been brought here by my family, who told me I was dead weight, that homelessness suited me perfectly, and that I didn't deserve family support. The hired audience murmured sympathetically. My family sat in frozen horror. My mother told me I was a burden who needed to be dumped. My father said some children just don't deserve family support. My sister was excited to finally get rid of the family burden. My brother agreed that I needed to learn real independence. Emma was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Her children looked confused, sensing the tension but not understanding what was happening. So there I stood, abandoned 300 miles from home, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the crushing realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had thrown me away like garbage. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching as my father Michael buried his face in his hands. But you know what? They were right about one thing. I did need to learn independence. Real independence. The kind that comes from knowing you can survive anything because you've already survived the worst thing imaginable, being betrayed by your own family. My voice remained steady, professional, even as I delivered each word like a surgical strike. I spent my first night in that homeless shelter on a thin mattress in a room with 12 strangers. I was the youngest person there by decades. I worked at a diner to survive, going to school during the day and working nights, smelling like grease and coffee, my hands constantly burned, my feet always aching. Linda was sobbing openly now, her face buried in her hands. But I wasn't done. I graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA. I earned a full scholarship to State University. I started my first business during college. By 24, I'd sold my first company for over $2 million. Today, at 32, I own a consulting firm with offices in 4 cities, I've invested in dozens of successful startups, and my personal net worth is something I still sometimes can't believe is real. I gestured around the beautiful venue. I own this building. In fact, I own several buildings in this city, the city where you dumped me because you thought I was worthless. Jake was shaking his head slowly, his face pale with shock and what might have been shame. But here's the truly interesting part of this story, I continued, my voice taking on a sharper edge. Recently, I learned that my biological family was facing some difficulties. Job losses, medical bills, potential eviction. The same people who told me I didn't deserve support were suddenly in desperate need of support themselves. Michael looked up at me, his eyes wide with dawning realization. So I helped them. Anonymously, of course. I paid their rent, I arranged jobs, I covered medical bills, I provided childcare assistance. I solved every single one of their financial problems without them ever knowing where the help came from. The truth was hitting them like physical blows. Emma's hands were shaking as she held her children closer. Why would I do that, you might ask? Why would I help the people who abandoned me at a homeless shelter? I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a kind smile. Because I wanted them to feel secure. I wanted them to think their luck had changed. I wanted them to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. I paused for effect. Because then I could take it all away. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the hired audience seemed to sense that something dramatic was happening. You see, when you own the companies, when you control the investments, when you hold the leases, it's remarkably easy to change your mind about helping people. The job offers can be rescinded. The rent payments can stop. The medical bills can be transferred back. The childcare assistance can be discontinued. Linda let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a wail. Tomorrow morning, Michael, you'll discover that your new job offer has been withdrawn due to budget constraints. Linda, your promotion will be reversed, and in fact, your position will be eliminated entirely. Emma, your children's childcare scholarship will be revoked effective immediately. Jake, your medical bills will be restored to your account, with interest. I watched as the reality of their situation sank in. They weren't just losing the help I'd provided, they were going back to the desperate circumstances I'd rescued them from, only now they knew exactly who held their fate in their hands. Your rent, which I've been paying for months, will stop immediately. Your landlord will receive an eviction notice to serve you by the end of the week. Michael finally found his voice. Kendra, please, please. I interrupted, my voice cutting through his plea like ice. Did you say please when I begged you not to leave me at that shelter? Did you say please when I was 17 years old, terrified and alone, asking what I'd done wrong? He had no answer. Let me tell you what's going to happen next, I continued relentlessly. You're going to experience exactly what I experienced 15 years ago. You're going to know what it feels like to have nowhere to go, no money, no help, and no hope. The only difference is that I was a child when it happened to me. You're all adults who should have known better. Emma finally spoke up, her voice shaking. Kendra, I have children. Please don't punish them for what we did to you. I looked at her children, innocent kids who had no idea what their mother had done to me when I was barely older than they were now. For a moment, I felt something that might have been doubt. Then I remembered Emma's face as she opened the car door and told me to stop being pathetic. I remembered her excited smile as she talked about finally getting rid of the family burden. You should have thought about your children before you threw away your sister, I said coldly. But don't worry. Unlike you, I'm not completely heartless. The children will be fine. Social services has excellent programs for families in crisis. The threat was clear. Not only would they lose everything, but Emma might lose her kids too. There is, however, one way you can avoid this fate, I said, enjoying the desperate hope that flickered in their eyes. I want you to beg. I want you to get down on your knees in front of all these people and beg me to forgive you. I want you to admit what you did to me was evil. I want you to acknowledge that you destroyed a child's life because you were selfish and cruel and couldn't be bothered to love your own daughter. The room was silent except for Linda's quiet sobbing and the confused whispers of Emma's children. I want you to apologize not just for abandoning me, but for every cruel word you said that day. I want you to admit that you were wrong about me, that I wasn't dead weight or a burden, and that I've accomplished more in my life than any of you ever dreamed possible. I looked at each of them in turn. And then I want you to thank me for being a better person than you are. Thank me for giving you the chance to keep your jobs, your home, and your dignity, even though you gave me none of those things when I needed them most. Michael was the first to move. Slowly, painfully, he slid off his chair and onto his knees on the conference room floor. Kendra, he whispered, his voice broken. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what we did to you. It was evil. It was wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. Linda joined him, her tears falling freely as she knelt beside her husband. We were terrible parents. Terrible people. You were never a burden. You were our daughter, and we failed you in the worst way possible. Emma was fighting it, I could see. Her pride warred with her desperation, her love for her children ultimately winning as she slowly knelt down. I was jealous of you, she admitted through her tears. You were smarter than me, stronger than me, and I was too immature to handle it. I'm sorry, Kendra. I'm so sorry. Jake was the last holdout, his young man's pride making it almost impossible for him to submit. But eventually, he too sank to his knees. You were the best sister I could have asked for, he said quietly. You helped me with everything, protected me, loved me, and I repaid you with cruelty. I'll never forgive myself. There they were, my entire family, on their knees before me, begging for mercy from the daughter they'd thrown away. 12 years of planning, 12 years of building, 12 years of waiting had led to this moment. And you know what? It felt exactly as good as I'd imagined it would. Thank you, I said simply. Now you can stand up. They struggle to their feet, faces red with shame and humiliation, tears still flowing. Your jobs are safe. Your rent will continue to be paid. Your medical bills will remain covered. Your children's childcare will continue. I watched relief flood their faces. But understand this, you are alive at my discretion. You have homes at my discretion. You eat at my discretion. For the rest of your lives, you will know that everything you have exists because I allow it to exist. I gathered my purse and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. Every year on the anniversary of the day you abandoned me, you will each write me a letter. You will thank me for my mercy, acknowledge what you did to me, and recommit to being better people than you were that day. Miss a year, and everything stops. I walked out of that conference room and drove straight to the airport. I had a red-eye flight back to Chicago and a board meeting in the morning. Behind me, I left a family who finally understood the true cost of their cruelty. They learned that actions have consequences, that the daughter they threw away had become someone they could never have imagined, and that sometimes, the people you underestimate are the ones who end up controlling your fate. Did I feel guilty? No. Did I feel satisfied? Absolutely. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. Sometimes it's becoming so successful that you get to decide whether they deserve to keep theirs. And sometimes, just sometimes, making someone beg is exactly the justice they deserve.